So if you have any money sitting in a bank account, maybe a savings account, or, even just cash in your wallet right now, you probably assume that is your wealth.
Hmm.
But what if that whole conventional idea of money as something that stores your value is fundamentally compromised?
Hmm.
What do you think is the single biggest vulnerability of the currency you're holding?
That is the question, isn't it? It's
Hmm.
really at the heart of our deep dive today. I mean, when we look at the dollar, the euro, the yen, we're looking at currencies that are, yeah, designed for
Just
transaction.
start buying things.
But they're failing that classical test of money, the one that requires durability.
Yep.
The real vulnerability is that they're constantly and, invisibly deteriorating.
And that really sets up the core tension in all the source material we've gathered.
Hmm.
This idea of the great distinction.
Right.
Fiat currency is this necessary transactional tool. It's essential for the economy to function, but it's also, well, demonstrably unreliable for long-term savings. So today we're going to unpack that philosophical distinction
And then get practical.
and then get very practical. We'll provide a highly rigorous, data-driven framework for actually building wealth in scarce assets, complete with the disciplined, algorithmic saving and an exit strategy. And we'll tailor it specifically for these volatile, decentralized visual assets.
Yeah, our mission for you today is really to provide a shortcut to being well-informed about money.
No.
The goal is to gain that knowledge quickly so you can start viewing wealth not by the sheer quantity of cash you hold.
But by the quality and the verifiable scarcity of the assets you actually own and control.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with the diagnosis then. Why is the currency in your bank account not considered true money by our sources?
Well, we define fiat currency as really just a proxy for purchasing power. What you have to internalize, I think, is that legally, fiat is fundamentally a liability of a central bank.
A liability, okay.
Its value isn't tethered to anything tangible, like a commodity. Instead, it comes from a legal mandate, a fiat, that just says it must be accepted for debts.
So it's built entirely on collective faith, but it's still carrying the IOU of the institution that issued it.
Precisely. And that faith is constantly being eroded by the system itself. This happens through inflation, which our sources describe as this invisible mechanism.
Inflation isn't just, oh, prices are going up.
No, not at all. It is the process by which central banks expand the total money supply. They're continuously diluting the value of every single existing unit of currency that you hold.
So you're holding a claim on purchasing power, but that power is highly perishable. It's like the lubricant for the market, essential for daily transactions.
But if you leave it sitting there,
It actively degrades.
that is the takeaway. Fiat currency just can't perform that classical function of a durable store of value. It's an effective medium of exchange, sure, but a terrible savings vehicle.
Okay, let's pivot and look at the cure. If that's the diagnosis of fiat's flaw, what qualities does an asset need to have to overcome those flaws and, truly serve as a robust container of economic energy?
The sources outline four pretty clear intrinsic qualities an asset must possess to qualify as true money.
Okay.
They are scarcity, durability, divisibility, and social desirability. Scarcity ensures the supply can't just be arbitrarily expanded. Durability means it won't decay over time.
Divisibility is for practical use, right? Making
Well,
change.
exactly. And desirability just means that other people actually want it. It has value to the collective.
When we look at the spectrum of assets that qualify, it ranges so widely. On the tangible, productive side, you have things like scarce land and productive property.
It generates income. It's fundamentally finite. It makes it a great container for wealth that actually appreciates against that fiat devaluation.
And of course, there's gold, the most famous classical monetary asset.
Right. Its value is driven by its chemical stability and a supply that is, for all practical purposes, finite. That's why it's served as money for millennia.
But here's where it gets really interesting, I think, because we move to the digital end of that spectrum. Bitcoin is maybe the purest modern interpretation of true money because its scarcity is absolute.
And verifiable.
Verifiable through mathematics. It's immutable, and crucially, it's decentralized. No single government or central authority can just decide to inflate its supply.
And we also see the power of that last quality social desirability in some really niche assets. Think about specific rare collectibles like original artworks or vintage retro games.
Yeah.
Their value is purely driven by the collective desire of a small group, but it's coupled with that verifiable scarcity. The moment you see a rare comic book selling for 6 figures, you're seeing economic energy stored not in cash.
but in a limited supply that's protected from a central bank's printing press.
Right.
So that summarizes the fundamental shift in perspective we need to adopt. True money, the assets, that's what we hold to preserve and grow wealth.
And the fiat currency, the perishable cash, you only hold that for your immediate transactional needs.
The key distinction is the act of liquidation. When you need to pay a bill, you have to sell a fraction of your scarce asset and convert it into that fiat purchasing power.
So the saver minimizes their exposure to perishable cash while they maximize their accumulation of high-quality, scarce assets. That's the mindset shift.
Okay, let's pivot now to the application. If this is the kind of asset we want to acquire, how do we approach accumulating it in a market that is known for just extreme volatility, like these digital assets, while mitigating emotion and risk?
The foundation is, it's straightforward, but it's absolutely essential. Education and robust risk management. Given the high-risk, high-reward nature of some of these assets, you must only allocate capital you can genuinely afford to lose.
Lose entirely.
Entirely. And security is paramount. You have to move beyond just trusting an exchange. For any long-term holder, learning the mechanics of self-custody.
Moving your accumulated assets off the exchange and onto a secure offline hardware wallet.
Yes. That is non-negotiable. It's the only way to achieve true financial sovereignty and protect yourself from a platform failure or, a hack.
Got it.
So once those principles are in place, the accumulation method is dollar cost averaging, or DCA. Most people know the mechanical definition. You invest a fixed dollar amount at regular intervals, regardless of the asset's price.
But the real benefit of DCA, it's psychological, isn't it? It gives you an immediate and total defense against that temptation to time the market.
It does.
Because nobody, not even the experts, can reliably pick the top or the bottom. By automating your purchases, you smooth out that severe price volatility and you eliminate your own behavioral errors.
And, our sources suggest structuring this strategy around time horizons that align with the asset's typical market cycles. The gold standard here is the 5-year saving plan.
5 years.
It's a disciplined commitment to HODL, a term that I'm sure you know.
Hold on for dear life.
Exactly. Making fixed purchases for 60 consecutive months. The goal is pure, unyielding accumulation. You move the assets to cold storage, and you try to forget about them.
That kind of commitment requires incredible patience, especially when the price is crashing. It's easy to DCA when the market is going up.
Oh, yeah.
It takes true discipline to stick to the plan when everything is down and every fiber of your being is screaming, wait for it to drop lower.
Exactly. And for building that initial discipline, the 1-year saving plan is excellent. It focuses on a more frequent weekly schedule, so 52 purchases.
And that weekly frequency gives you a better price average, right? Compared to monthly.
It does, a superior price average. It reduces the chance that you accidentally make a big purchase right before some temporary market peak.
So for you listening, if you're just starting out thinking about saving, say, $1,000 this year, that weekly commitment is just about $19.
$19.23.
It's small enough to be manageable, but it compounds into a really significant accumulation habit that overcomes that fear and volatility.
Right.
Okay, so now let's unpack the hardest part. You've successfully accumulated your stack over years. Now the market is exploding. How do you actually sell without becoming paralyzed by greed or feeling that terror of missing out on the final gains?
This is where it gets really interesting.
This is where the solution of the algorithmic exit comes in, using publicly verifiable on-chain metrics to remove emotion entirely.
And this is where that knowledge extraction becomes so critical. I mean, standard price charts, they only show you supply and demand. On-chain analysis, however, it reveals the collective profitability and the temperament of all investors.
So it shows you the cost basis of the entire network, data that's just invisible to the untrained eye.
That's right. This allows us to make decisions based on verifiable network reality rather than the emotional panic or euphoria we see in the price ticker.
Okay, so tell us about the macro signal, the one that puts us on high alert.
That would be the MVRV Z-score. What it does is it compares the market value, which is simply the current price times the total supply, to the realized value.
Wait, okay, let's simplify that term, realized value, because it sounds way too technical. How should we think about that?
Think of the realized value as the network's collective acquisition price. It's the sum of the prices at which every single coin was last moved on the blockchain.
Ah, okay, so it's basically the aggregate cost basis for the entire network.
You got it.
So the Z-score is essentially measuring how far the current market price is deviating from what the average investor actually paid for their holdings.
Precisely. The Z-score measures the standard deviation between those two values. And historically, when that score enters the upper band, often above a 7.0, it signals that the market is in a state of extreme euphoria.
And when you look back at prior market cycles,
Those high scores tangibly correspond to the historical peaks. It confirms that the asset is severely overvalued relative to the network's fair on-chain price. This red zone is the non-emotional signal to begin liquidating.
that gives us the macro climate, the big warning sign. But you can't just sell everything on one day. How do we pick the specific windows to execute a sale?
For those immediate execution triggers, we use a confirmation signal, the SOPR, or spent output profit ratio.
Okay, SOPR.
You can think of this as the network's collective blood pressure, or maybe its immediate profitability thermometer.
How is it calculated, and what does it tell us in simple terms?
The calculation is pretty straightforward. It divides the price at which a set of coins is spent or sold by the price at which they were acquired. So if SOPR is above 1.0, the average coin being sold is realizing a profit.
So if we see SOPR peaks shooting way up to, say, 1.15, what does that indicate behaviorally? What's happening?
It suggests two things are happening. First, a significant volume of coins, many of which were acquired a long time ago, are being spent at a massive profit.
Right.
And second, it signals widespread distribution by long-term holders. A disciplined exit plan uses these sharp, sustained SOPR peaks, which signify maximum liquidity and willingness to realize profit, as the short-term execution triggers for a phased sell-off.
So the two metrics work in concert. The MVRVZ score crosses into that 5.0 to 7.0 range, and that places you on high alert. That's the macro warning.
Yes. And within that high alert phase, sharp increases and sustained high SOPR readings, say above 1.15, those become the execution triggers.
For your systematic liquidation, maybe selling 10% of your total holdings every time a new local high prints in that SOPR reading.
That's a great way to structure it.
So those two tell the main story, but are there any supplementary data points our sources mentioned that help confirm the reading to prevent a false positive?
Absolutely. We should briefly mention the Puel multiple. This is another excellent confirmation tool because it compares daily miner revenue to its yearly moving average.
And what do high values there tell us?
High values, often above 4.0, confirm the market is overheating. It's because the exceptionally high revenues are incentivizing the miners, who have production costs, remember, to sell a greater portion of their newly mined coins. This increases the overall market supply and confirms that prevailing sell pressure that MVRV and SOPR are already showing you.
Okay, now we have the technical framework. Let's bring it back to the practical exit strategy. We're phasing out or DCAing out. What are the crucial phases?
Phase 1 is maybe the most psychologically vital. Recoup initial capital. Your first objective, perhaps when your position doubles in value, is to sell exactly enough to retrieve your original dollar amount invested.
And why is that step so important? It seems simple, but why?
Because once that original capital is back in your bank account, the remaining stack is essentially a risk-free asset. It immediately removes that massive anxiety associated with potential downside, and it frees you up to make completely rational decisions with the remaining profits. You are now, as they say, playing with house money.
That completely changes the game. Phase 2 then becomes staggered profit-taking.
Correct. This is fractional selling, maybe 10 to 20% of what's left tied to those on-chain metrics we just discussed, or maybe to predetermined milestones like a 50% increase from your last sale point.
And this methodical process locks in gains slowly.
It does. It avoids the panic selling that often happens when the market just crashes 50% overnight.
And we absolutely must emphasize a critical financial component that's often overlooked.
Yeah.
Tax plan.
This is non-negotiable. You must prioritize the sale of assets held for over 1 year to benefit from potentially lower long-term capital gains tax rates, where that's applicable in your jurisdiction.
Yeah.
That shift from short-term to long-term rates can fundamentally change the net outcome of your entire exit strategy. It can turn a good sale into a great one.
So what does this all mean?
I mean, we've synthesized a coherent savings life cycle that is entirely non-emotional. It transforms the often terrifying act of accumulating volatile assets into a lesson in personal finance discipline,
You leverage long-term scarcity and growth.
while applying technical rigor to secure those gains when the market is euphoric. True wealth, as we established, isn't measured by perishable cash, but by verifiable scarce assets.
It pushes us to question the entire nature of trust. If traditional fiat cash is fundamentally a liability based on collective faith in centralized institutions, how does the emergence of assets like Bitcoin, which are transparently scarce and mathematically verifiable, How does that fundamentally change the nature of trust in the future economic system?
Hmm.
The trust shifts away from human governance, and it places it squarely on open, verifiable mathematics. If mathematics is now the better guarantor of value than a central bank promise, well, that's a paradigm shift for you to consider the next time you look at your savings account.